I'm really excited tonight to present our guest. Lynn Bierbaum is going to be joining us. She is joining us. She's right above me. And her work spans the disciplines of glass blowing and alternative process photography, specifically wet plate collodion, along with others. But with a BA in photography and extensive experience in both glass studios and the darkroom, Lynn is now in an MFA program at RIT. And tonight she'll be sharing her work and her process with us. And there will be a Q&A at the end. So if anybody has questions, you can put them in the chat and Lynn will be answering them after her presentation. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to you now.
Sounds good. Right. Well, thank you, Dale, so much for inviting me, and thank you everyone for coming. I'm excited to get to share a little bit about my background, some of the processes I work in, both within glass and photography, and some older work as well as kind of new work that I've been exploring throughout my graduate school degree during the last couple of years here. So I will start working on sharing this presentation with you all here. There we go. All right. Awesome. Well, like Dale was saying, my name is Lynn Bierbaum, and I consider myself kind of a sculptural photographer. I work in both the 2- and 3-dimensional realms within my work, and kind of finding a way of combining photography with sculpture and glass, and using optics and light to convey what I'm trying to speak as an artist. So a little bit of background information about me is I'm currently 27 years old, and I'm originally from Minneapolis, Minnesota. And I received my Bachelor of Fine Arts in Photography at the University of Wisconsin River Falls in 2017. After I graduated undergrad, I began working as a full-time glass blower all around the country. And so I was working for studios just as contracted employee and working in make your own. So I was teaching people how to make flowers and ornaments and things that they could take away. But getting to work with the community and getting to see people's passion for process and materiality was always something that I loved to do and continue to love to do. I also worked as a photography studio assistant for Jill Enfield at Penland School of Crafts for 2 months in the spring of 2019 when we were teaching a concentration on alternative processes. I worked as a social media and community manager, and I'm currently a writer and curator for Analog Forever magazine, and I've been working with them since about 2019. And I am currently getting my MFA in photography and related media at the Rochester Institute of Technology in Rochester, New York. So some early works that I was always interested in was like working in platinum palladium. I kind of was originally self-taught. My professor in undergrad knew a little bit about certain techniques. He taught me the basics of platinum printing and then handed me a few books and was like, here you go. And kind of explored on my own and testing and experimenting and lots of failed prints for the beginning works of my time. But it was a great way for me to kind of figure out the technical side of the process from the ground up. I learned everything I did wrong. And from there, I started to be able to play with those different chemical errors, which you'll see later on as well. But platinum palladium and wet plate collodion were kind of the two that I really dived in deep. I loved the rich tonal ranges that they could achieve, the beautiful high contrast, and of course the like very monochromatic style, and the fact that I was able to have almost like the hand of the artist within my work. It felt very process oriented, and I was able to create almost these tactile objects, which was something I loved. I also really got into Van Dyke Brown early on as well, and being able to play with ways that you can actually tone prints, and cyanotype as well, and being able to actually alter subtle parts of the chemical process so that I was able to create images that really felt like my own, not necessarily through the imagery itself, but through the making. I've always said I'm a type of photographer whom I feel that the images that I make have never been made through a photo or through a camera. All of my images have always been made once I hit the darkroom, and I'm able to manipulate either the chemistry or the imagery through the process of making. And so you'll kind of see a theme going on today where a lot of my work revolves a lot about process and making. So an artist that was a huge influence to me early on in my career was Dan Estabrook. He was actually a mentor of mine. I had taken a 2-week workshop with him at the Penland School of Crafts in 2018. And he was kind of the one who originally taught me everything I was doing wrong in all of my explorations to figure out these different alternative processes. He kind of told me and taught me like the correct way of making. And I think that I'm very glad I learned on my own to start, but having Dan as a resource to be able to like explore and expand my knowledge of these techniques became a huge benefit. And I also bring up Dan for the fact that he was an artist that really introduced me to the fact that photography can be used for so much more than just a two-dimensional plane. What we see that comes out of the camera doesn't have to be the final product. Dan is really well known for drawing and painting on his images and manipulating them even after the photograph has been made. And that's something that I've always been very fascinated in manipulating and using photography as almost a canvas for future work. And here's another example of some of his work as well, playing with the duality. And he has beautiful still lifes. So in 2017, it was my last semester in undergrad. I decided to take a glass blowing class. I had never tried it before. And I was like, hey, you know, when else am I ever going to get the chance to try glass blowing? So I took the class and let's just say I fell in love with it. It was something that I no longer could see my photographic work separated from this glass idea. I knew that this technique of wet plate collodion that I had just started learning in had been done on sheet glass, and then the history of glass negatives and wet plate within ambrotypes. So I decided, I was like, well, if I can print on sheet glass in a large format camera, what's stopping me from printing on something that's blown semi-flat glass? So I started experimenting in the hot shop, making these flat forms that I actually would take corks and flatten the side so that each side was almost like printing on a piece of sheet glass. So I could print on these three-dimensional forms and objects. So like I said, a lot of my work doesn't actually begin in the darkroom. It begins in a hot shop, or what we call a hot shop, which is a furnace worked glass studio, in which we have large furnaces in the center of the studio. Here you can kind of see we have two large metal tin men almost, and they hold about 250 to 500 pounds of glass, molten glass, that stays up to about 2100 degrees Fahrenheit all day, every day. And we gather glass out of this furnace, and when we're working with it, it's almost like really hot taffy. So you're able to actually manipulate and move that glass to however you see fit. So I'll show you a short little video as well. And this is me actually making a flat form within the glass studio. So this is a piece that I would actually print photographs right onto the side, and I'll kind of show you that a little bit as well coming up. But here we'll kind of see. So the first tool I'm using there is called a marver, in which it was originally a like marble table in the ancient days. Now we use stainless steel, but I'm selectively cooling the area of glass that I don't want to expand. So when I blow into the pipe, just like I am there, it'll only expand where I didn't cool the glass. So I'm able to keep that really thick mass of glass at the end, so the bubble doesn't expand as far. The tool I'm using there, the equipment that's glowing bright orange, is called a reheating chamber. And we go there constantly to keep the glass nice and hot, because while we're working, it cools off at about 100 degrees a second. And so we have very little working time at the bench. So you'll see we are constantly kind of getting up and down and up and down, and going back to that heat so we can continue to work. The tool that I'm using in my hand is actually just folded up about 10 sheets of newspaper, and it's just kept wet so that I'm able to actually shape that glass. It's almost like shaping with a baseball mitt. And I'm able to, just like with a marver, control where the air expands. And my assistant in the back, named Mackenzie, was helping me with blowing air so that it would continue to expand out. One thing I love about being in a hot shop in comparison to a dark room is the community atmosphere. It's something where you can't make a piece on your own. You always are working in teams of 2 or 3, and you're able to really grow a great friendship with the people you're around. And so where I'm a very much a independent body in the dark room, this is where my kind of community flourishes. And I absolutely love being around all of the assistance and help. It takes multiple people to accomplish what we do. So what I'm doing there is I'm actually creating a constriction mark to tell the glass exactly where I want it to break off. Because if I were to try to break it off, it would have no idea where to break. And so by giving it that mark, it just tells it where to separate from the pipe later when we need to work on the top of the piece. So again, going back for some more heat. But this is always the start of all of the works that I make, is always kind of experimenting and playing within the hot shop to see how I want the forms to expand out, what sort of shape am I going for, more rounded, taller, and I'm able to kind of manipulate and move the glass how I want. So now I'm using those cork paddles, and I'm actually going to start to flatten that glass so that I can create the 2 sides that would create or be my image plane later. So my assistant covers the end of the pipe to keep the pressure and air in there so it doesn't concave. And I go in with the 2 large cork paddles, just like what would be in your wine bottle or like yoga blocks, just like that, all natural cork that is just shaping the glass. And so my assistant grabs a little heat, and then we finish up. This is the quick version, a little bit cropped. Usually these pieces take me anywhere between a half hour and 45 minutes to make in the studio. But beyond that, once it cools down to room temperature is when I'm able to start working with it in the dark room. So a lot of people ask me, are your images inside of your glass? And the fun fact is it's actually not. All of my images are on the surface or the outside of the glass, but I found ways to actually scratch away the edges of the collodion so that it's able to be seen almost seamlessly warping into the glass. Only if you're really up close to the pieces do you ever notice it. So I'm flattening the bottom. So the area that I'm working at right now, what is attached to the pipe is what would be the top of the piece. And what I'm working on is the bottom of the piece where it would sit on a table. So you're kind of working backwards. It's very similar to ceramics, where when you're working in ceramics, you're working in a vertical axis. We're doing the same sort of techniques, just on a horizontal plane rather than the vertical, and just moving up and down the rails of the bench. This is really fun to practice at home if you ever have like an armchair and a broom, and you can just turn that broom on the armchair, and that's kind of the same way that we practice turning our pipe on the bench. Because it's something where it's a very right-handed craft, but you can actually end up finding lefties that have the upper hand in turning, because even turning helps a lot moving forward. So what we did is we actually transferred the piece by sticking glass rod onto the end of the bottom and then flipping it. So we're now working on the top, and I'm just making sure that my sides are really nice and even, because you'll know if you're trying to print on anything that has a slight divot or a bump in it, those bumps are actually going to end up printing blurry. So I try to make sure that all of my pieces are as flat as possible, as if it was a piece of sheet glass. And that just takes a little time with the newspaper on the sides, just to make sure that it's really nice and flat. Also, this was a shot over the summer when it was almost, I think it was like 95 degrees in Minnesota one day. So we were very, very warm in this studio that day. Most definitely not taken right around now and the nice winter weather. So there I'm just continuing to make sure it's nice and flat before we break it off. And we put it into annealers, which are like hot kilns kept at about 900 degrees. And it comes down to room temperature throughout about 12 to 18 hours. It allows the time for it to cool down slowly so that it doesn't crack or break in the annealing process. So my assistant, Mackenzie, is ready with some like Kevlar gloves, which are fire retardant gloves. And she will actually grab onto the piece, we'll break it off the pipe, and she puts it into that annealer to cool down. And that's how my flat forms are made overall. I've continued in working in this process and making these different flat forms in different shapes and colors because a lot of them are representing of people. And there we go. So that is how I make some of these pieces. This style of work of making these flat forms started to inspire a whole body of work called my Holding Hands series. And I did a lot of explorations and tests before I even started experimenting in that. And this one in particular, I just left untitled, but it was a keyhole with a gravestone in the back, printed with the ambrotype wet plate collodion process. And here are a couple more tests I had really early on when I was experimenting with these processes, as well as learning glass. So you'll kind of notice that the forms get more intricate as we go forward in time as well. So my process of making wet plate collodion, I consider kind of a modernized version of it. So I photograph all digitally using a Canon 6D camera, and I'm able to then create digital positives that I lay onto the surface of the chemistry. So the collodion process, I start by coating my plate or my glass piece with the collodion, and I put it into a dip tank, or if it's blown glass, I actually pour the chemistry onto the surface of the glass and allow that to get sensitized until it has that kind of milky tone to the image plane. Next, I actually use an enlarger light and a timer so I can control the exact amount of exposure that the piece is getting. It varies depending on the amount of light as well as the density of my digital positive, but it's generally around 30 seconds to about a minute worth of enlarger light. And I just expose through that negative or that positive in contact with the emulsion before doing the developing and fixing of the image. And then when it's clearing, that kind of milky tone starts to fade away, which is one of the most beautiful parts of the process, is when all of a sudden this image just appears in front of your face, and all of the chemical marks and things that make the piece and the project its own through the materiality of wet plate is something that I've always been drawn to. And so I love keeping some of those chemicals staining as long as you can control them and figure out why and where they are on the plates. And so this is an image being fixed in the different steps. So when I'm doing my blown glass, it's very similar to printing on a piece of sheet glass or a tin plate. I'm using that same modern collodion technique that I was showing before. And all I'm doing is actually taping off the entire glass form in electrical tape and cutting a frame of where I want the image to be placed. I have a digital positive in the exact size that I want the image to be, and I lay it in contact with the emulsion and use the enlarger light to expose it. I always do a lot of tests prior to make sure that I'm only doing this 1 or 2 times if necessary, so I'm not wasting as much chemistry. So I do a lot of testing throughout all of my work. But here you can see a few from my Holding Hands series before they were cleaned up and the tape removed. So here's my Holding Hands series. This was my first real sculptural photographic work that I had made. And this series was actually my way of making portraits of people that were no longer around me. While I was traveling around the country working as a full-time glassblower, I made a lot of connections with people. But unfortunately, when you're moving, it's so hard to keep those connections close. And ultimately, some people start to kind of fade away in your life. And so for me, I wanted to remember people that had a huge impact on me. And so I created these still life portraits in a way in which I've never told anyone who the different pieces are, but to me, I see faces instead of these actual still lives. And I like the fact that everyone has memories that can revolve around a flower, a cigarette, or an ice cream cone. And it's kind of open to the way in which you interpret those memories you share with others. And so whom I see is going to be very different from who you see. And so here's kind of the artist statement written there for you, but one of my cigarette pieces in which the models of them also represent the genders of the people that I consider them to be portraits. So male, female, or non-binary. It was a way for me to communicate through imagery how I remembered the different people throughout my life. Mentors, past relationships, family, friends, anyone who had a significant impact, and the way that I kind of remembered my time with them. And here are a couple more of them as well. And you can see how that seam or the frame of it really starts to fade away as I just black out all of the information as it starts to fade from where the image plane is or the photograph and the glass. So it is pretty seamless as you're viewing. The Holding Hands series really started making me think like more internally of, well, who do I want to be and where do I want to go? I was in the process of working on my application for graduate school, and I was thinking of like, where do I want to be in 5 years? Which is a question we're all asked all the time, especially around my age when you're in your 20s and trying to figure out just where your place in life is. And so I created this series that I called My Telling Hands. And these were, I studied palmistry and the different lines and how they represented throughout your life. And there was so many tellings of hand lines that were your past self and your future self. And so I started to create these as self-portraits of who I was 5 years ago and where I wanted to be in 5 years. And so it was a lot about my chronic migraine, my relationship with family, with friends, and overall just career, how I wanted to live in 5 years. And so this was kind of my self-portrait that I created, still using the symbolism of the hands as a portrait. When I got to grad school, this was a project I had done in a glass blowing class with David Schnuckel, in which our project was to create a piece that combined our home media with glass. And since that's kind of right up my wheelhouse, I decided, how can I start to incorporate glass not as a canvas, but in the image making? And so I made this sculpture that I called a candlestick, and it encased a key inside that I had actually placed in while it was hot, being made in the glass studio, and closed up the hole so that key can never be removed unless the form was broken. And it represented to me this idea that time is always warping, that life and light is always warping and moving. And so I started to play with this kind of space and time, as well as manipulating light. And so here's a little short video of how the glass all of a sudden started to be the image making. It started to create the image rather than it being the canvas of it, and using glass and its optical qualities to manipulate, move, and warp light. It's so mesmerizing to watch as well. So I had this video of a candle actually dubbed over. And so this video was in motion, and so was the glass. And so this motion kind of created this ethereal effect of the light and almost the flame being made from the glass. And if you look close, you may be even able to notice about halfway up the flame of it are dents and marks, and that's from the key moving around the glass as it was still hot, and it imprinted its sections onto it, and it created the different warping effects of the light at the top. So all the speckling and dot bubble effect that we're seeing is from that key moving around the piece and denting the glass while it was being made. So this kind of started getting me to think about how glass has material memory. Every movement you make, every single thing you do, poking, touching, and spinning that glass is remembered through the material, just like that key jiggling through. And so I made this kind of quick little example so you guys can see how the materiality of the glass remembers, just like human memory, which is something I'd been playing in with my Holding Hands series on how I remembered people throughout my life. And so this connection between material memory and human memory is something that I've continued to explore throughout my graduate school career here at RIT. And so every movement I make, if good or bad, hesitations and my meaning marks, all are recorded through the material of glass. The only way to ever get rid of it is to heat it up so hot that it starts to melt away. So this started to inspire my more recent works that I've been creating throughout the last year and a half. And here you can actually see the optical variance in the way that the glass remembered that material, or the memories as well. So then I started figuring out, well, how can I use glass and the optical memory that glass has to warp and manipulate my imagery as it's being exposed onto a photographic paper. So I started taking this glass rondelle, which is basically a texturized plate, and I was able to use the optical variance in the clear glass to warp and manipulate the light as the image was being exposed onto silver gelatin paper. This resulted in a very hazy-like effect that to me created a more realistic or true interpretation of how I remembered different moments throughout my life. So I used negatives that I had shot between a 12-year period, and I looked at them, and the way I selected was images that I knew but couldn't remember what was going on around me or what was going on around the time that it occurred. So this image, the memory was really lost, and the only thing I had was this photograph that wasn't able to actually remember every finite moment of what happened. So when I wanted to print this photograph or print these photographs, I wanted to make sure that they were hazy. I wanted to make sure that they were not fully readable, or that there were areas of just black voids, because that was how I remembered them, pieces of information gone and missing. So here are a few of those as well. One thing I really loved about this was that some images were so far distorted or so far altered that you couldn't really even tell what they were part of the time. And so this image in particular, I've heard we see a snowy landscape. I've seen people talk about how it looks like an interior space, but they can't tell where. I've also heard that it's just weird lines and shadows. And I love that that's so open, because to me, I see what it is immediately. But to everyone else, it's this sort of abstracted form that isn't quite readable, but seems familiar. And I love that idea. So these spaces that we think we know, we're not quite fully seeing. I started playing with this idea further within like the material memory, and how could I just straight record that information as well? So this is my crazy setup of making lasergrams, whom I was taught by a ghoul when I went to the Experimental Photo Festival this last summer. She taught a workshop on lasergrams, and I was able to learn so much about the way in which light is refracted through different optical variants of glass. And so it can be recorded onto photographic paper. I kind of took this making process and added this kind of metaphoric abstract approach to it. So the way I looked at it was when the laser light actually hit the optics of the glass, I viewed that as the past memory when it had occurred. The space between the glass and where the photographic paper is held is the time. It's symbol of time and how time moves forward and things alter and change. And then the paper is our current recollection of our past memories. And so this was kind of the metaphor and the abstraction that I gave to these works. And it resulted in these really beautiful abstract forms that were completely unreadable to what they were. So even though I was refracting through this textured glass plate, you would never guess from what the image appeared, but what I'm doing is recording almost the material's portrait, the material's image of what it is. And each one recording different areas of the glass, and the way that some areas of the light are more intense, and so those are much darker, and you have other areas that kind of get really soft and wispy, and recording really fine detail through the laser light. A more recent influence that I've been working with is Melanie Walker. I got the chance to have a good interview and conversation with her just virtually over Zoom last spring, but her work is so inspirational to me as a way of combining this like two-dimensional form of photography into the sculptural installation and immersive realm of work. And so her house heads in this kind of altered reality that she creates as a form of like environmentalism to speak to the wildfires as something that I've definitely looked to as inspiration. Is how can you bring photography into the third dimension? How can you create this kind of ethereal, ephemeral effect through use of image and light? Her sculptures and the way in which the kind of intimate qualities to them are, they draw you in, and they also make you look at the world in a different way. This seems so different from what we know, but at the same time, very familiar and very comforting. And the puppets are just amazing. I've never seen one in person, but it is my goal one day to get to see some of her puppet works as well. But this kind of otherworldly effect, but it really draws you into this world that she creates, this immersive experience. So of course, I had to come back to sculpture throughout my work as well, and I've been exploring these bell jar forms. So the symbol of the bell jar to me speaks to the way in which it protects, but it encases, also forever altering the way in which we view an image. And so this is the same photograph printed in 4 different bell jars on different fabrics. It's on both silk as well as a quilting fabric, and encased in UV reactive resin. When the resin cures, it actually peels and separates away from the fabric, creating these distortions so that every single piece is the same photograph, but altered to the point where it's no longer seen the same from one to the next. And it's to the point where what the actual photograph is almost unreadable. And here's some close-ups of some of them as well, just in a couple different views. So this is the same bell jar from 2 different angles. And it actually creates this almost captured in ice, captured in a moment in time sort of feeling. And all of them are very small. I think the largest right now is about 4 inches tall. So it's very intimate objects that when you hold and you move it in your hand, it alters the way in which it's seen, warping your perspective through that space, through the optics of the resin and the glass, and onto the image of the fabric. And the texture of the fabric as well, and the translucency makes it so that you're able to not just see the material of the fabric, but see through it as well. And here's another one that is only about 1 inch tall. It's a very, very small little bell jar. And the image is almost crumpled inside. So that idea of it feeling suffocated, it kind of feeling contained, but also it's forever protected. That image will never change. And so our view of like wanting our memories to stay forever, but knowing that they can't, is what I'm trying to communicate through my work. And this kind of mental mindscape that we create in our head that isn't necessarily reality, but it's our reality. It's our kind of altered perspective of time, that of our past. So my work is currently jumping into the realm of installation, inspired by Melanie Walker, as well as other installation and sculptural based artists. This is one piece in particular that will be included within my installation that I'm working on for my MFA thesis show at RIT in April. So if anyone's around Rochester, feel free to come check it out early April. But this is all I have of it right now. Everything else is still abstract in my mind. But there's going to be 40 of these plates printed with collodion onto them and then hung from the ceiling. And so as you walk underneath all of these collodion plates with both chemiogram collodion and the images, you're going to be immersed in shadows past. So it's supposed to create this kind of place where you can go that is your own. And I call it my beach. And it's where my mental mindscape, my homescape is, of all my past memories that I want to hold on to, even if they aren't fully real. It's where I find comfort. And I'm hoping that through my installation, it'll allow people a space and a place where they can actually find their own, or it'll transport them to their own mental mindscape. So I'll end my presentation before the Q&A with a quick little writing as to this experience that I'm working to try and grow and create within my works. So it goes like this. I remember my tiny kid 7-sized Mickey Mouse shoes with worn down dirt tinted rubber soles and the white lace stockings sticking through the holes on the side. I remember the miles of walks taken on the beachfront and walking trails just barely making marks on the sand, only later being washed away from the waves rolling against the shadows of receded footprints. Wiping away where I once was, this memory, like a frozen breath of water, conversing with the whispers of the eucalyptus leaves. This became my mental homescape, the memory I repeat in my head, my place of comfort. But the relenting reality of confined space and time surrounding me, I know it is but a fleeting moment, connected to others, but yet lost amongst no one. My beach, my home, my past, all like bricks on a wall. Placed, but negated of information, just blank memories stacked together in a set pattern. My life being built in front of me. But have I ever just truly been in a moment, experienced a memory in the making? Because all happy, sad, exciting, melancholy moments fade away. becoming faces, places, and memories we once cherished. My work is about these past times, the place in your head you return to again and again that feels like home, even when home feels so far away. It's natural to lose what we cherish in life, but that doesn't mean it has to be so distant. They stay with us, not in a photograph, not in a novel, but in our minds, our brains, our mental cameras, capturing the moments no photograph could. It remembers the tiny, insignificant experiences that for some reason stick out to us. The hotel carpeting, the specific shade of purple from your favorite childhood blanket, the moment you knew you were in love, that someone, something would miss you. Those moments of awe and aspiration are what I hope people see within my works. I want to bring viewers into my mindscape, into a moment's past, my footprints on the beach, then to their own. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you, Lynn. That was a lot of information and images and
Yeah.
such a deep delving into not only your process, which is fascinating, but also the conceptual aspect of your work too. It's time for questions. So if anybody has questions, and I'm sure you do, please put them into the chat. Also, we get a transcript of the chat. So if you want to put a comment in the chat that's not necessarily a question, something that you want to share with Lynn, we do share the transcripts with our speakers. So feel free to put stuff like that in as well. But if you have a question, put that in the chat, or there's also a raise hand function. So if you want to ask with your voice instead of your typing fingers, you can definitely use that function as well. So Marie put something in the chat. Oh, well, I think you may have actually answered that, or at least in part. Marie is wondering if you have written anything to accompany your works featuring other hands or of those whom you wish to remember. So not quite the same as what you just read off, but specific to the previous, your earlier project.
Yeah, I think writing was something that I always struggled with. I've never been the best writer in the world. And so early on, I don't think I did as much writing. I think a lot of my ideas tend to come through when I'm speaking, especially one-on-one with people. And so I'll kind of start to go on tangents. And when I'm talking to someone one-on-one is when really ideas start to flow for me more than writing had. Through grad school, I've learned to really love and grow into writing. And I found that more of my recent works have become very writing focused. But my older work was not quite as much, but definitely something I've jumped into further.
Yeah, and Marie's comment goes on, and she is a writer, and she's suggested actually if that process of writing in response to your material objects may be revelatory in ways that the images and objects themselves may not be. So it sounds like you're kind of developing that writing side of things in your practice.
Yeah, and it'd be interesting even to live with the work that I had made and start writing about it now. Even though I had made it a couple years ago, it would be nice to kind of start to dive in more to the writing side of the work and see where it can tie in, because the Holding Hands series is something I hope to come back to in the future to continue on. I think it'll be a never-ending project for me, as I'm always meeting and growing from new people. So
Marie actually followed up that you may not feel like you're the best writer, but you are without doubt incredible and have a distinctive lyrical voice. So your writing is going in a good direction.
well, awesome. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, and also writing years after the creation, having interesting possibilities related to memory, where he
Mhm.
adds that as well. And we actually did have a question from Alex. Have you tried collodion process with polycarbonate as a base plate, which does not cost a lot of heat than glass? So I guess a less heat intensive glass type option.
I haven't tried polycarbonate. I have printed some collodion on like colored acrylic before, in which it does work, but it tends to actually have more likelihood to peeling, even with the like subbing solution underneath. So I'd have to do more tests with it, but I'm also a glass purist, and I do love my glass. So it's even hard to work on tin nowadays or doing tin types. I just love the translucency that glass has to offer, but polycarbonate would definitely be an interesting avenue to explore further.
Thank you, Alex. All right, so does anybody else have questions to either put in the chat or use the raise hand function and ask with your own voice? And once again, you could put comments in there as well, and I'll share the chat after the fact with Lynn. Well, good luck with your master's show thesis as well. It sounds like you have a lot of work to do in the next few months.
Always fun though. Never feels like work when you're making art. Time flies.
Yeah, I don't know if I'll be able to make it up to Rochester, but I can't wait to at least see photos of the installation.
Yes, I'll most definitely try to stay up to date on Instagram is a great place to see what's kind of going on within my work and new avenues I'm exploring. I always love to give little teasers on Instagram as to what I'm working on. So lots of in process as well as some finished work up there too for everyone to look at.
Do you want to go ahead and put your Instagram handle in the chat for people in case they're not already following you?
Of course, yeah, I'd love to.
Great.
So there you can find me on Instagram and see kind of what I've been up to. Some of my older work will be up there as well as some snippets of some new work as well. But what you saw today, a lot of people have not. So get a little sneak peek into it, which
Excellent.
is cool.
All right, so it looks like everyone has been very inspired, including me. I love the sculptural three-dimensionality, and the cross-disciplinary aspect of your work is just so amazing. And I think it's a treat for photographers to see the glass blowing process. That might be something new to people in the audience. So that's a really great opportunity as well. All right, if there are not any other questions, again, feel free to put in some comments, last minute comments or questions. And then just remember, if you're interested in attending any of our other talks, our next one will be in 3 instead of 2 weeks, and the speaker will be Paula Tognorelli, who was our guest juror for this year's Living Image, which opens on December 10th. All right, and on that note, if there are no more questions or comments, I'd like to thank you very much, Lynn, for joining us tonight and sharing all of that with us. And thank you to everybody in the audience for attending.
Thank you all. And thank you again, Dale, for inviting me to share my work. It was a great opportunity, and I'm glad everyone enjoyed the work. And thank you so much for your wonderful feedback, everybody, as well as the thoughtful questions. It was much appreciated, and I had a great time getting to share my work. So thank you.
Thanks, Lynn. It was a real treat. All right. Good night. Good night, everybody.
Good night.